Hey, good morning, everybody. Here I am again. We're going to be doing another news roundup today. We've got a lot of stuff to get into, so I want to get right into it. I'm having trouble monitoring the stream today, so hopefully this is going out okay. If it's not, just put something in comments and let me know. We may have to abandon this and try again. LinkedIn seems to be giving me some grief today, but let's get right into it. So I got a lot of stuff to go into. And let's just check something here on the technical side. Yeah, no, that should be okay. Okay, so yeah, so if you go to the Oxebridge.com website, you're going to see a lot of news, a lot of things that are popping up. Because last week there was I forget what it was. There was some glitch or something where I couldn't do this. So we got 2 weeks of news to get through. So let me do that as quick as I can. The first one is that an independent a warning for anybody who's making standards on their own outside of ISO is that ISO is actively scouring for intellectual property. You know, they go around and they look for folks who are, working on their own standards, and then they approach you and they'll say, that they want to help develop the property, et cetera. But eventually they're going to wind up taking it and they're going to sell it, and you don't get any money. So it's just it's an opinion piece that I wrote to warn anybody who's working on standards that they need to keep things tight to the vest. They need to make sure they have everything trademarked and copyrighted properly, et cetera, before they get into anything, before they leak this to ISO, et cetera. That's a quick one. Second one, again, moving pretty quickly through it, is that we found a paper. Katie Arrington, who oversaw the CMMC program, published on LinkedIn a white paper on CMMC and the cost of CMMC. And when I ran that through a plagiarizer checker, we found out that 30% of the text, which by my math is almost a third, was plagiarized. For example, she took an entire section out of a Summit 7 article by this other guy named Jason Sprosser without attribution. So she gave herself credit. So it says the white paper is written by Katie Arrington, but there's an entire page of it, page and a half, I think, of her paper that was just taken from some article online that had been published like the week prior, and she took credit for it. And you can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, it literally was copy pasted. The bullet points were just copied and pasted. She just didn't make any changes or anything. So that's interesting that Arrington had to resort to plagiarism. And by the way, the definition in the academic world of plagiarism is that somebody takes something without attribution and claims it as their own. It's likely that Summit 7, who's very much on board with Katie Arrington, will come out later after the fact and say, no, it's okay that she did it. That doesn't matter. It's still plagiarism. It doesn't matter if the author gives permission afterwards or if they give permission beforehand. She has to credit the original author. She can't take credit for something that she didn't actually write. And the reason that I was tuned into writing, checking it for plagiarism is that if you listen to Katie Arrington speak, you realize that she cannot form words. She can't form sentences. This is not somebody who has the ability to communicate, very well. Suddenly in the middle of this paper, all of a sudden there was somebody communicating well. And I said, well, it's obviously, she must have got that somewhere because she doesn't type like that. And that's what it was. It was taken from this paper here. So that's interesting. Paul Simpson stepped down from TC 176, specifically Subcommittee 2, if you care, SC2. He was the chair of SC2, and that's the subcommittee that writes the ISO 9001 standard. And Simpson took that position on a few years ago. And that's a surprise. We don't know what's going on. I mean, I'm mixed feelings on it. I hope the guy's not sick. He's claiming personal reasons. Don't know what. But at the same time, he was facing some very, very serious complaints and internal investigation for his behavior on social media. ISO has very strict rules on how its committee chairs and members, et cetera, are supposed to, act in these committees. And Simpson was kind of just, running roughshod over all those rules, which was not cool. One of the things that, he was not supposed to do is attack critics, and he would attack me and other critics all the time. He would present his views as the official, position of TC 176, et cetera. Really not supposed to do that. So But we hadn't filed that complaint yet. There were others inside ISO that were alerting the ISO secretariat that this guy was kind of off the rails. So I don't know if one of their complaints worked or not, or if he was under heat for that, but he just couldn't seem to rein in his behavior on social media. So anyway, he's out now. We don't know why, but that's interesting. And so another BSI functionary, or a BSI functionary, will be taking over that role for now. Oh, here's one of the things he said just recently. He's been claimed to be an expert on ISO 9000. He wrote a whole book on it, on the 2015 version. He wrote a book on it. I've got it here somewhere. And yet then when he was challenged on LinkedIn by a reader named Al Smith, he to explain why the change in terminology happened, right? Why did they change from documented documents and records to documented information? He just said, "Are you asking me to justify work that was done leading up to a document that was published over 10 years ago?" So suddenly, like, Paul Simpson didn't remember stuff that happened that on the standard that he claims to be an expert on, and it wasn't even published 10 years ago. It was 2015, not 10 years ago. So I don't know. It was just a bizarre post, but it sort of revealed that in reality, Simpson didn't have any role in the development of the 2015 version because he wasn't on the committee. But he's made a lot of claims since then to make it sound like he was somehow involved, and he kind of really wasn't, and that got exposed. Running on the Oxebridge site, we also have an op-ed piece from Dr. James Klein. Forget China and Russia. Biggest risks to ISO are internal. And in that piece, Dr. Klein is responding to the podcast and the web interview that I did with Michael Mills over at the Quality Matters podcast, where we talked about the effect of Russia and China and Ukraine on standardization. And Dr. Klein just came in and kind of said, yeah, those are important issues, but the bigger thing, he said, is the issue will not be whose standard will dominate, but will anyone care about obtaining a standard at all? And his concern is that there's so much fighting over certain things going on in ISO, and specifically like whether risk will dominate quality, et cetera, that it adds confusion, and especially with ISO 9000, and that folks may not even be interested in it. So I'm probably poorly paraphrasing his piece. So go over to oxbridge.com and you can read his op-ed there. Here's an interesting one. These breast implants that are allegedly certified under a quality system certified to ISO 1345. They contain dog tracking chips, and they were developed in a pizza oven. This company that we're talking about here, they do the Motiva brand of breast implants. They apparently put these RFID trackers inside them, so doctors can track and scan, I guess, who has what inside the woman, right? But these trackers are only qualified for veterinary use, and they're not qualified for human use, and yet they're being stuck inside these things, and this company's going for FDA approval. So that's concerning to me, obviously. And the fact that they were developed in a pizza oven, you're not going to believe it, so I'm just going to post it. Here we have, this is Juan Jose Chacon Quiros from Costa Rica, I think. Although here he's posting from Paris, I don't know. Back in 2019, and he said 10 years ago in a garage in San Jose, we were developing prototypes of the breast implants in a pizza oven. And today he's on NASDAQ, et cetera. So what happened was this company here, Hindenburg Research, it's a I don't know if it's a hedge fund or what, but it's a financial research and investment research firm. They did a really, really damning report on October 19th, really tearing apart this company and this founder, talking about all the various problems that they've had financially, the claims that they make that are either, Hindenburg is saying are not true. And the fact that, this stuff was developed in a pizza oven and contains veterinary tracking chips and other things. So again, go to the Oxford site, read the article, and that'll link to the Hindenburg site, which is what we're reporting on. It's pretty interesting, and it's upsetting because the breast implant industry should have learned already, and just doesn't seem to be learning. I don't know. I've got an op-ed piece here that I wrote on TL9000 being a stunning, massive failure. I mean, I'm way back in 2001. I had just been starting to I'd already had like 10 years experience or so with ISO 9000. And I was starting to get my feet wet into the ISO ecosystem. and I was invited to participate on TL9000 in the writing of that standard with the Quest Forum, who's the body that is responsible for that standard. And I so I got a copy of that version that was live at that time, or the draft or whatever, and it was a massive thing. It's a huge thing. It was like 140 pages or something. And I said, I'm not going to participate in this because it's crazy. So again, they launched this in 2000. And it's now 22 years later. And I went and I checked because you keep seeing these TL9000 people, specifically Sharonda Jeffries, show up at all these ISO meetings, or she's on the ANAB board and she's on IAF boards and she's on all these boards, and TL9000 is always like represented and giving special time at these meetings. And they have these volumes and volumes of standards and documents and things. And, and I wanted to say, has anyone actually ever used this thing? And the answer is kind of no. After 22 years, this is their own data. This chart here shows that they have less than 600 certified companies, right? There's a couple things interesting about this chart, but they have less than 600 total certified companies in the world over a 22-year period. That's all they got, was less than 600. The other thing that's interesting is that the TL9000, if anybody has any experience with it, it's tremendously descriptive on what metrics you need to gather, what data and metrics. There's a whole volume on that, right? And here we look at their chart, and they don't even know how to make a chart right. They got the legend is reversed. The blue is actually the cumulative growth, and the red line is the number of certifications, and their legend is reversed. So they don't even, I mean, they're so dumb, they don't even know how to make a chart, right? And we're supposed to take their word for it, but just imagine that. And so they had another chart which showed the certificates by the certification body worldwide. And we see 597 total, right? Of which I think it's less than 300 are in the United States. So about 280 or 290 or so companies in the United States. So what my article did was we went and we pulled data from the US Census Bureau on how many companies are in the United States in the telecommunications industry. And we compared that with what TL9000 is saying the scope of their user base is. And their scope of the user base is massive. It's anybody having anything to do with telecom. So it can be telecommunication providers, but it can also be switch manufacturers, the manufacturers of the chips that go into switches, things like software developers, and even consulting services. So it's massive. And just identifying the US companies that were clearly in the census data identified as telecommunications or some related that were obvious, we had over 400 something thousand, 500,000. And then if we factor in other things that were likely to fall into the scope that TL9000 is talking about, the number went into the millions. It became impossible to count. So out of millions and millions of possible US telecommunication supply chain companies, they got 300 in the United States and less than 600 worldwide after 22 years. And yet Sharonda Jeffries and these people on TL9000 are still brought out and trotted out at these meetings as if they're, they have something to say. They don't. They have a 22-year massive failure on their hands. No one accepts their standard. No one wants it. And they don't know how much more data. And of course, you have this big flood of fake data, fake certs coming out of China. And the other interesting thing is that these folks don't know the difference between South Korea and the Republic of Korea, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if they think that that's two different countries or not. But it really is just a bad picture for those folks. Let's see here. Let's go over here. Just check something for a minute. I'm not getting any preview at all on LinkedIn, so I have no idea if this stream is even going out. Could be going out with no audio or who knows what. So as usual, it'll be a mess. Another report we found out was that, so what happened is that I received a very, very large data dump on a lot of the minutes and records for ISO's most recent activities, specifically TC176 that writes the ISO 9000 family of standards. And so we're going to have a lot of reports on this because there's a lot of data to unpack, and it was a big data dump. It was, I think, 0.5 gigabyte or something. I don't know. A lot of stuff coming from ISO. But one of the things I noticed was that TC176, in one of the slides, they no longer view people or companies that buy the standard as the customer. I want you to think about that for a second. If you buy and spend money and pay money to ISO, TC 176 says you are not the customer, okay? They view themselves as the customer and ISO headquarters. So you're not going to believe me. So here's the actual slide, and I know it's difficult to read, but the actual slide here shows in green who TC 176 treats as its customers. And it lists the ISO Central Secretariat, national standards bodies like ANSI in the United States, UCAS, then TC 176 members themselves, right? Which is all the people who are like creating this spreadsheet, and sector specific liaisons that would be like TL 9000 and IAQG for AS 9100. The yellow then are interested parties, and the end users are all the way down at the bottom. Those are the people who buy the standard and pay for audits. Those people up top in the green, they don't pay for standards. They get free copies. They all get free copies. So they're not even like, but it's interesting. This is not true. If you go back and you look at minutes from, 2000 and the 2010s, this was not the view they had. So this is new. This is something new. Do I have another slide on that? No, I don't have another slide on it. Okay. So, and it's disturbing. Now, the slide appears to have been presented by a team that was led by two people. And one of them is Alan Daniels. Alan Daniels is the chair of the U.S. Mirror Committee delegation for TC 176. And he's also one of the top guys at the AS 9100 Standards Committee, which is run by the IAQG. Now, the IAQG has this view. They view that the people who buy the standards are not customers. The AS 9100 customer is the aerospace prime, which is like Boeing, which Alan Daniels works for. And ironically, Boeing does not actually implement these standards itself. It just imposes them on everyone else, and then it blows up airplanes. So I'm wondering if Daniels has brought this mentality over to TC 176, the aerospace mentality, where if you're a standards developer, your customer is not the person reading and buying your standard. It's the internal party, it's those group. It's very bizarre. So they're working to promote themselves. And that's essentially the big takeaway here, is that TC 176 is put in a slide. Now, I don't know if this will ever be public information, but it's, I'm publishing it. Showing their allegiance is to the ISO headquarters in Geneva, not to the people who pay and buy the product, which of course is ironic, right? Given that ISO 9001 has a whole clause on customer focus. And here we see TC 176, Alan Daniels and these people not showing any customer focus because they refuse to recognize their customer. And this is also very convenient now, because now they've given themselves official policy cover. If you file a complaint, they can ignore you because they could say you're just an interested party. But if we get a complaint from a customer, then I have to react, or they'd be hypocritical to their own standard. So now the only complaints that they really need to process are from those folks in green. They don't really have to process complaints or feedback or listen to end users, and it's astonishing. But it's consistent with this new ISO from the last 10 years, especially under this Chileno, who's the president now of ISO. Not the president, he's the Secretary General of ISO. And when you go back and you track his history, he's got a fun history of corruption in Chile. But it seems to be him, and his people manipulating this so that, they want these technical committees working to sales goals, selling standards, making money, not working on content, not talking to customers, et cetera. So the quality of the content of an ISO standard no longer matters. It's the quantity of standards, how many pages, and getting that price point up per standard so they can sell more of these. And because ISO is a nonprofit, the money just goes back to the executives. So it's not shared with shareholders or anything like that. It just goes back into, so the more money they make, the more money those executives get. And that's what this is on. Very, very disturbing. And then lastly, I have one breaking story. It's not on the website, but again, one of the other leaked documents is a slide deck from this thing called the ISO IEC Joint Task Force on the Concept of Risk and Associated Terms. All right. It's a joint task force, and it's represented, I guess, by TC 176 by Lori Hunt, who is, again, she's the real head of the American delegation, the U.S. delegation. Alan Daniels may be the chair, but he's powerless. No one can seem to get Lori Hunt to sort of stand down. She's running the show. And then Jose Dominguez, another guy who's just been a career ISO flunky and hasn't really accomplished much else, in my opinion. And then another guy named Graham Watson, who's sort of an X factor. He's a Brit. Another guy, he worked for a company, quality management system kind of VP or something. What's interesting is none of those people have any experience in risk management. Now, they're going to say they do because in 2015, ISO injected risk into ISO 9001, and suddenly anybody who'd been working in ISO 9001 quality had to be a risk management expert at the same time. And so everybody just reframed themselves and says, oh, okay, as of 2015, I'm now a risk expert as well. And so these folks will probably say, we've been working on risk management in the concept of ISO 9000 now, since 2015. Yeah, that's not the same as actually going to school for it. That's not the same as being the VP of risk management or being an ERM expert or having credentials. It's not the same. So it's unfortunate, but these folks that are working on this committee, representing the United States at least, why one of them is British? No, representing TC 176 rather. That's why. Don't actually have any real credentials in risk. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to redefine the term again. ISO just cannot come up with a definition of risk. It's tried and failed, and it just can't do it. So at some point, I don't know, they're going to have to surrender and realize that they're trying to standardize something that really just maybe can't be standardized. So that's interesting. Yeah, and finally, just make sure you run over to Amazon.com and grab one of my books, either Surviving ISO 9001 or Surviving AS 9100. It's your choice. You can get which one you like. And that's that. So yeah, the other thing you want to do is make sure you follow me here on LinkedIn. Again, I'm still working on trying to get these podcasts to work right. Got all the tools and everything now, but I don't know, something's quite not right here, I think. But so I hopefully this isn't a total embarrassment. And if it's fine, yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. Also go to the Oxebridge.com website and follow me there. Subscribe rather. We don't put you on any spam list. What you'll do is you get a weekly brief of all the headlines for the prior week, for the prior week. There's no advertising or anything like that. And it just keeps you up to date before everyone else. All right. So thanks a lot. Put your comments below and let me know how this went. And hopefully we'll get to see you next week. Take care.